Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. We've got people joining us from all over the world today, and welcome to broadcast number 5 in our epic Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants March Mammal Madness Extravaganza Mashup Festival of Awesomeness. We have featured all sorts of amazing programs today. We did art and design, genetics, animal behavior, a retrospective of 10 years of the amazing March Mammal Madness festivities earlier today. Thank you so much for continuing to join us. We've had audience members that have been here for every single program all day long. Now, I'm a host. I have to be here, but I especially appreciate it for classrooms that just throw all those math lessons right out the window and join us for like so much fun. So I want to do a quick few notes for everyone joining us if you might be joining for the first time. If you are new to March Mammal Madness, check out the LibGuide. The LibGuide has all the educator resources, all the brackets, all the stuff, all the great art to get you involved and engaged in this like king of science communication activities. If you're new to us at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we do like 40, 50 broadcasts every single month with the coolest scientists and explorers in the world for free, for classrooms everywhere. They stay up on YouTube forever. It's always a good time, but very seldom do we get to have quite as much fun as we have had today. The March Mammal Madness team are the most hyped group of scientists I've ever run across. You guys are ridiculous in YouTube chats. You all watch each other's programs. It has been such a professional and personal thrill today. And frankly, we have had way too many living creatures today. You know, cheetahs are fine, grizzly bears are okay, you know, walrus-like and all that good stuff. But where it's really at are all the dead things. Because it's like a gift from the universe. It did not need to be the case that we could trace the ancestry. We could trace these ancient worlds with things like dinosaurs, which if you think about dinosaurs, if you think about ancient mammals, these things that no longer exist, that's crazy. It's amazing to think about some of these creatures. And we're going to dive into that today with 4 really amazing scientists talking about their work and getting you guys equally excited about the bracket, March Mammal Madness, and so much more. Now, before we dive in, my first question for our scientists is going to be about iconic fossil moment for them, something that they experienced in the lab or in the field. So scientists, get your thinking caps on. One of my favorite things I ever learned about was at the Royal Ontario Museum where I grew up. They found a 70-foot dinosaur in a bunch of boxes, and they put it up in the lobby. So there's this, again, amazing learning opportunity that so many millions of people get to have now because of things that were collected years ago. And this is one of the essences of paleontology is you can collect all this amazing stuff, share it in the world in so many different ways. And so I'm really excited to hear to kick us off with all our scientists today of an equally exciting experience. And so on my screen, Bryan, zoologist, instructor at Oregon State University, is first up. So Bryan, what is a wicked cool fossil experience? Do tell.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm going to go with a good story. When I was working on my PhD, I was at the John Day National Monument, John Day National Fossil Beds Monument in Central Oregon. And we were there with a class of other paleobiologists talking with the curator there, and we were going to go out in the field to search for fossils. And he was telling us about like where's to look and things to find. And my advisor's son, who happened to be, I think he was 5 at the time, he kind of looked down and said, like, I found a fossil right here. And the curator there was like, oh, like probably not here. Like we're going to go out. And he's like, no, I found it right here. And he ended up looking down and he found the lower jaw of a mouse deer. And it was a new species for that locality. And he came down as the youngest ever person to find a fossil in the John Day fossil beds. And so that was a pretty cool experience. And they're just chock full of fossils all over the place out there. So real fun.
Cool is that? I grew up in a major city, and the fact you could go to the ravine and crack open rocks and find trilobite fossils, like things that you're the first human eyes to see that in hundreds of millions of years, is as mind-blowing to me as an adult as it was when I was 4 years old. Like, it's just the coolest thing. So what a great story to kick us off. No pressure, other 3 scientists. Bryan set the bar pretty high. But let's head next to Kristi, who's joining us today in California, where we all wish we were because it's lovely there. I'm in the middle of a blizzard, so I especially wish I was in California. But Kristi, what's a cool story you can share with us?
Well, I have had the opportunity to study fossils in museums and in the field, and I've had really wonderful, cool, awesome, exciting experiences. But actually the most memorable for me was not part of my career, but actually when I was a child. So when I was really young, my sort of love for paleontology was sparked by a dinosaur dig that I went on in Montana, in the Badlands of Montana. And it was just a few days that I got to spend, digging in a quarry, but it was so cool as a little kid, 8 or 9 years old, to be able to dig up dinosaur bones. And so this was hadrosaurs. It was Myosaurus. And we have pictures of me as a little kid digging up bones. And for me, that was really the most memorable. And when I think back on all of my experiences, that's the thing that sparked everything and sort of put me on this trajectory to where I am now.
That is so fantastic. And again, we've got a lot of audience today in Canada and the US, and we're both blessed as countries to have so many amazing fossil locations, mainly sort of not quite on the West Coast. You got this Alberta, Montana sort of corridor, but some of the most amazing things you can find on this planet are right there, and people can go, and there's incredible interpretive centers. And so if our classes ever get the chance, head to those places. There's nothing quite like being in the field at one of those sites, and I'm so glad it inspired you so much. Kristi, that was great. Marc, joining us from the real ASU, Appalachian State University. If you want to dive in and take us away with all your cool fossils behind you, I read your Twitter. Do share any story you may have.
So I won't comment on the real ASU because that just started a whole thing. But I'll take a little pivot. So I went to South Africa to look at some fossils, and we weren't able to see them for various reasons. But I did get to access the archaeological collections. And it was a sort of amazing moment of my life where you walk into this room and there were kind of like Indiana Jones with this boxes and boxes of really cool stuff. And I remember opening it up and looking at stuff that was collected in the 1920s and 1910s that no one had ever really looked at in a very long time. And it was just sort of this moment of my life where, like, oh my God, I'm in South Africa looking at this stuff. And it was just an incredible feeling. And also related to MMM was going on at the same time. And fun science fact, South Africa is a different time zone. So I would be, doing science all day, staying up till 2 a.m. to tweet out a battle, then going to sleep and waking up again at like 7 to go to the museum. But that would be maybe a sort of MMM-related fossil story I can share.
Not only is your dedication palpable, which is something, again, that's been a testament to all the amazing audience sort of this whole incredible festival, but what a cool opportunity. And again, we've been emphasizing this all day long. If you're in science, you get to collaborate with people around the world. If you want to, you can decide, hey, I'm going to work in Australia, and then come up with a cool thing you can do in Australia and get the chance to go there. It's such a magical thing about the scientific enterprise. And we talked earlier today about the fact that it can be a lot of schooling. To be a professional scientist, to get a PhD, like many of our speakers today, takes a long time. But you have this incredible, fulfilling career and this opportunity to work in the most amazing places at 2 a.m. and tweet stuff out. So thank you, Marc. That's great. Speaking of different time zones, Yara Haridi joining us. Thank you so much for coming in across the pond, so to speak. Do tell any story you may have. I'm really excited. This is 3 for 3 so far. You're the last one. So best for last. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll totally end this with a banger of a fossil story. So I usually work on really small fossils, little fragments of bone here or there, and I try to figure out how these animals lived. But in 2019, I got a chance to actually join a big dino dig in Utah, helping some friends pull out a brachiosaur humerus. So that's the long-necked dinosaurs, and the humerus is just a big arm bone. But it was on protected land. So we weren't allowed to bring ATVs, we weren't allowed to bring powered machinery. And the smartest idea came from our 9-year-old friend's child who was with us. And she's like, why don't we use horses? So we used 2 giant draft horses to pull out a brachiosaur humerus. And it just felt amazing to use or, be assisted by these giant animals to unearth another giant animal that used to walk on our earth. And that was just a magical moment. And, fossils are pretty cool.
They're pretty cool. I mean, again, one of the lessons here is always listen to the 9-year-olds. We've been getting so many great questions from young people all day long. So students, you can contribute to real science. Citizen science is actually something we haven't talked about much today. That's ultimately the obvious, the best manifestation of it being live in the field and something very cool like a dinosaur dig. But I hope all our students take the opportunity not just to learn in March Mammal Madness, but to get involved in science. You can take part. You can talk to scientists. Scientists, right, Yara, always want to be talked to. Like if you got emails at 2 in the morning, Kristi, like if kids got in touch with you, would you just jump at the chance to answer their questions or blow them off? I think this is our March Mammal Madness group. You guys are pretty hype about excited children and excited people. So awesome. Okay, I have you talked about one arm bone, and this leads me to a question that I think on behalf of all of the human race, I want to know. we all see these things in museums where there's like one bone that a scientist finds. They find like one vertebra of a, brachiosaur, diplodocus type thing. And they're like, here's what it looked like. It's like, how do you know? You have one vertebra. So from your perspectives in various fields, like, are you just making stuff up as you go along? Like, you're creating whole bodies out of nothing. And I don't believe you personally, or I kind of believe you. But what are you basing this on? Bryan, you were our first in the first time. Do you want to take a stab at this to begin?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's lots of commonalities to like structures in the body. And one of the big things that I'm always telling my students, right, is that structure equals function. And so by learning about structures, you can then start to piece together more about what like is contributing to that. And I'll say I study teeth, and teeth are the absolute best ever. I get super excited about teeth, and most paleontologists probably get really excited about teeth because like if you see a tooth, you can understand almost everything about that animal. You know what size they were, then you can figure out what types of things they're eating, and that gives you information about like what habitats they must have been in because that food must have been there. And you can then start to get into like some really complex things about like interactions and all kinds of great stuff. And so you can actually learn a lot from just small bits of material as long as you know some of these patterns and can piece stuff together.
So, Bryan, I was going to follow this up by asking people who's on Team Teeth, but you guys as the March Mammal Madness community are like already sharing in the chat. So, Christy, you're the only one who didn't say teeth, but you didn't say anything. Are you Team Teeth, or are you like totally like a skull or a neck person, or what?
I like everything that's below the skull. So for my actual research, I do study like arms and legs. But however, for the purposes of March Mammal Madness, I am Team Carnassial.
Okay. That is, and Jessica, who's been joining in every broadcast too in our genetics presentation, she's Team Teeth. We got a lot of teeth people today. This is very exciting. By the way, speaking of our YouTube audience, I want to say a huge thank you. Miss Fowler's class joining us in High Point, North Carolina. Been here in like every broadcast today. Miss Jerich's class joining us in Columbus. And then we've got our group in Cape Breton. Canadians, I must say, we got a lot of Americans today. You guys are great. We don't all live in igloos up here. We are really awesome. We're not running from polar bears all the time. And welcome into our Cape Breton crew too. It's been great to have such a consistent audience all day long. So our bracket. This has been the big question today. Some people equivocated. They're like, oh, they're all nice. They're all great. Katie likes to do that. That's fine. We can mock her, but she's not here. But if you had to pick of our 64 this year, is there one that really jumps out? Yara, you're at the top of my screen. So kick us off.
Oh, it's such a toss-up. It has to be either between Therapsid or the spotted salamander. For me, it's just so hard to choose between the two.
So, I mean, you're throwing a wrench in our thing here because we're all paleontology today. You've got like an ancient creature. You've got like a living creature. Why even give the salamander a chance? Like
that's such a good question. Right. So salamanders and amphibians in general are kind of they kind of hold on to a lot of really ancient features. And they help us understand a lot of animals from the past, as well as why they made it into the future. For example, spotted salamanders have a really good ability to regenerate, which later animals have lost. So I think that might help them out.
That is a very good point with regards to return. Most of the people picking haven't done anything related to how the battles would actually unfold. So thank you very much for that. And frankly, who's got a phone ringing? This is half the time. That's okay. We'll just ban you. You're gone now. There's nothing you can do to stop us. No, but this is a really cool point. By the way, I wish as a human we had the capacity, like you like lost an arm, you just grew it back, and like it started out as like a little tiny mini arm. That'd be so much fun. So very cool. Marc, what's your pick? I know you answered earlier, but for people new to you, what's going on?
I mean, yeah. So I was really doing the leaf slug, and I'm trying to make that be a big team. I'd say if not that, I would probably be like the conspiracy of lemurs, just because lemurs are awesome. And I like prosimians. So I'm probably between those two, if that to be really fair. But like, I mean, I don't know. I think it's like everyone else has said, when you're the narrator, you try not to have a favorite because then you get biased and you don't want to be biased.
Right.
So I would say, like the artist said at the time, my favorite is the battle I'm going to write next.
Yes. Well, speaking of artists, I don't know if you saw in that program, but I drew a leaf slug because you talked about them. So this is my slug. And I think he's beautiful. If other people think he's beautiful, please feel free to say so in the chat, but that's good to hear. Okay, so we've got two things. Conspiracy to lemurs, as someone who's been to Madagascar, are pretty special. They're really, really cool. Christy, what do you think? Any firm opinions?
This is a hard one. I like them all, of course. But I really love the mountain lions. I have a soft spot for mountain lions. I live in Los Angeles. We have mountain lions that live in the city. We have coyotes, we have bobcats, we have a lot of really cool urban wildlife. So I'm rooting for the mountain lion.
Okay, pretty good pick. We've had a lot of carnivores today. We had some wolf pickers. We had some mountain lions now, lions. We had people who said lions, and we had also people who said that they wanted lions to lose in the first round. So it's been a mixed bag today. Okay, Bryan, firm opinions. What do we think?
Yeah, I'm gonna be pretty similar to Christy. I'm not gonna go with mountain lion though. I'm gonna go with jaguar. I think there's gonna be an epic showdown, cat on cat violence, some real carnage goes down, but I think jaguar is gonna come out.
Okay, so like
I will say though, don't sleep on the therapsid. I think it can go pretty far too.
So you've covered my next two questions. First of all, so if we had to have jaguar versus mountain lion, I must admit, Christy, I think the jaguar just completely wrecks the mountain lion. Jaguars are awesome, and they take out caimans, and we have that on film, which is pretty awesome. Yara, Marc, if you have to choose between those two directly, like if it's a literal cat fight, who wins? Jaguar, mountain lion? No pressure. You're writers, so you don't want to take a side.
I gotta say jaguar, just for style points. Style points alone.
Mountain lion just blends in with everything. He's too big. He's literally and figuratively beige, right? We don't want that. Now, okay, the second question is, what's a therapsid? For people that have never heard of this before, who wants to take the therapsid stab? But you all know. You don't want to admit you don't know. Yeah.
So for everyone at home that is wondering what a therapsid is, they are basically they might as well have been shaped like modern mammals, like a modern jaguar, but they're not actually mammals. They're relatives to the relatives that then became mammals. So they got big, crazy teeth, big, strong heads, a wide stance, and they lived in the Permian, and they're really cool. You should look them up.
Okay, and so I'll put that in the chat for everyone in a second. Now they're fighting in the first round another ancient creature, which is a Scansoriopterid. Scansoriopterid. What are they? I mean, these are our only two ancient creatures, which is kind of sad. You have like a really like tiny bit of the bracket that's going to wipe each other out in the first round. Who knows what that guy is for our new audience?
I can take it if
Sure.
people want. So it's a somewhat new group that there's been a lot of recent fossil finds coming out. These are these really cool dinosaurs that have both feathers and wing membranes. And so they were flying or had the ability to at least glide. And they're a really neat cluster of different features that are really unique, having both feathered wings and membranous wings, kind of like bats.
That is awesome. The number of flying things that we found in the last like 20 years is amazing. And I've been stressing this all day long, no matter what your field of interest is. Like, it's the best time to be curious ever. If you are interested in science, it's the coolest time. There are more fossils, more things being discovered. It's just, it's fantastic. So thank you for that, Bryan. I'm curious now. I want to dive in a little bit on what you guys specifically focus on. So we've been covering this with scientists all day long. Marc, I know you got the chance to talk earlier about this, but for our new audience that might be joining for the first time, what's your specialty?
So I'm sort of interested in the question of how we became human. So how do we go from more like chimp-like things to fully human-like things? And not just how, but why, and what sort of pressures were on our communities in the past. And even though sadly we're fundamentally aware of how sometimes we don't get along, but how we can get along as a species as well. So my interest has sort of stemmed from those kind of questions, and specifically asking us, like, how come humans are so good at seeing things and making connections to things that are not there? So, like, hopefully everyone who sees a stop sign knows to stop. There's no reason why that stop sign means stop. We all just agree upon that. So I'm sort of curious as to when that happened, when our ability to do that happened, and is that a new thing? Is it an old thing? Is it distinctively human? So how can we sort of look at those questions to understand sort of the processes of becoming human?
Very, very cool. So one of the things that always strikes me about paleoanthropology is this idea that it wasn't just species millions of years ago. Like, in the not too distant past, there were several different hominids alive on Earth at the same time. Can you speak to that for a second? Like 50,000 years ago, we have a few different kinds of man or man-like creatures going on. What are they?
Yeah, I mean, and this is sort of the big question now, right? Is that, so there are a lot of different samples, different populations of things. Like, this is I was prepared, like a little Neanderthal, And, they were running around when things that were more like similar to us might have been running around as well. There were these small little things called hobbits on the island of Flores in Southeast Asia. So there are all these things, right? And the problem scientists have now is we've created these typologies and these ways of thinking, and then we think that we don't know how they interact. And the newest research is showing they're all kind of different versions of human-like things. They're all exchanging genes, and modern humans, whatever the heck that means, we are sort of the product of sort of this hybridization between all these different groups of, human-like things. So there's a lot of in terms of everyone was talking about in the past couple of channels, is how much is changing, how much science is advancing, with the geneticists and the artists and the paleontology and the archaeology, it's all coming together in this really sort of, there was a paper out yesterday that looks at this question. It never stops, but it's also really fun to think about.
I was going to say, when I was finding out your Appalachian State University thing yesterday, it was about the fact that Neanderthal, people that have slightly more Neanderthal genes, it was about HIV resistance and stuff like that. It's so fast. And again, details to be determined. Check out those things and find those actual articles. But it's a fascinating thought that we interbred with these slightly different species and it changed our makeup today. Anyway, but also, as many times as I've seen it as a scientist by background, when you go to grab a skull and the jaw isn't part of it, it's terrifying. So thank you very much for that. Christy, what are you getting up to these days?
Yeah, so I am a biological anthropologist, and I'm really interested in the way that the skeleton is adapted to the ways that animals move around. So I study humans, but I also study non-human primates and other mammals. So within primates, for example, primates move in all kinds of cool ways. So the technical term for movement is locomotion. So I study locomotion. There are primates that are quadrupeds, so they move on all fours in the trees or in the ground. There are primates who are suspensory, where they actually hang from their arms or their legs or even their tails, which is very cool. And then there's the coolest primates, of course, which are vertical clingers and leapers that actually leap from tree to tree to tree to tree to tree. So I've been spending a lot of time studying these leapers, but I've also been comparing them to other mammals that hop. So I'm looking at marsupials, I'm looking at rodents like kangaroo rats, which are adorable, marsupials like wallabies, bettongs, that sort of thing. And we're looking at what are the similarities among all these different types of animals that move in similar ways? How are the bones adapted to the ways that they move? So we're identifying basically structure, function, relationships, and then we can use those relationships that we've figured out with living animals and then apply it to the past. So we're inferring locomotion in fossil animals based on what we've figured out in the living animals.
Very, very cool. I'm so glad you mentioned these vertical climbers and leapers. So for those kids in the audience that know Zabumafu, Kokril Shafaka, leaping 30, 40 feet from one tree to another, grabbing on with big spikes on it is amazing. I must have
the coolest.
Okay. Let's bring in people. I'm curious. Okay, so that's one option for coolest. My case is for gibbons and brachiation, which I think is the closest we've ever come to flying in our entire evolutionary tree, apes close to us, where you're grabbing a branch and your whole shoulder rotates around it and you can go that way, 30 feet. I don't know. And YouTube, by all means, chime in here. I'm team brachiation. I've seen Chafakas live, which is amazing. So I haven't seen a gibbon, but they're very cool. Okay. Awesome, guys. Bryan, I'm going to head to you. What's going on? Tell me more.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in big scale processes that play out both in deep times like paleontological times, as well as into modern times with humans. And so I like to try to figure out aspects of, say, interactions between species to see how they change to make these large processes of what organisms will form in a community, and then how those communities stay intact, and then what could cause different organisms to go extinct. And so I look a lot into the fossil record to try to piece together what patterns emerged that are natural and compare that to what has been going on with humans on the landscape. And so primarily what I look at is I reconstruct diet to try to figure out what these organisms in the past were eating, and then what kinds of interactions they had with other species in their communities. And the way that I like to do that is I actually look at the surface of teeth. As it turns out, as mammals chew food, they're going to make lots of little scratches and cracks and things on the surface of your teeth. And that's what you're seeing here on your screen is essentially a scan of a tooth from a coyote. And you can see how there's all these pits and scratches. And I can use that, and lots of scientists can use that to determine the types of foods that those organisms were eating. And so then we piece that all together to find out what organisms were eating what. And then we try to look at then why those organisms might be more specialized or more generalist, and then what that means in terms of their ecology.
Very, very cool. And I'm so glad you mentioned a coyote and called it a coyote. I'm team coyote. We've had coyote people today. It's been a nice mix, and we've gone into the sort of weeds of pronunciation as well. But one of the cool things about mammals in general, I know we have some non-mammals in our March Mammal Madness bracket this year, is the different kinds of teeth. This idea of having like incisors, we've got the molars for crushing, so we have this omnivorous diet that you can tell just by looking at our dentition. So team teeth, you know what? I'm fully on board. Team teeth for the win. Oh, we got a model. Props are the best. Bring in props, everybody. Bryan, thank you very much. That's great, man. Yara, last but not least, again, save the best for last. We're keep doing it with you.
So I started off studying teeth as well, but more of how they're made, what tissues make them up, and where those tissues came from. From there, I started studying bones and how bones work to kind of, again, understand how our own bones work. So there are certain rules that our bones follow, but those rules weren't always there. And so I'm kind of diving into deep time, looking at weird old fish, weird armor that's made by things that we consider not even fish, and look at what their bones and their teeth like things were doing to kind of understand our own today. So that's what I do.
Two things. I'm going to actually give a YouTube question to you in a minute. What is a weird old almost a fish? Like what are you talking about for our audience?
That's a good question. So before the fish that we know today, there were a bunch of mud slurping, bottom dwelling, fully armored, jawless things that we call early vertebrates or basically jawless fish. So that's what I'm talking about. They're usually called kind of like placoderms and other things that were before them. So you guys might know Dunkleosteus. That would be the most famous placoderm.
I'm going to put that in the chat for everyone so they can see the name. But yeah, okay. Again, these are some amazing, amazing creatures. One of the things that, does it fall in this category? It would be a fish. A coelacanth is a pure fish, right? And then we get like the lungfish that start coming up on the land. Okay. So look, we could go all day with cool ancient creatures. I'll make sure everyone has a link to Dunkleosteus. But Yara, while you're here, so our first question relates to what you were talking about. How do you identify the types of bones? What animals they come from? So you find a bone. And it's like, okay, now you four are all like really trained at this, but you find something, you're like, tooth's pretty easy, teeth are pretty standard. What are you looking for? Is there something that jumps out to you?
So when it comes to identifying bones in general, first you kind of have to know where you are. So the same way that if you were in a jungle, you would expect jungle animals. If you are a paleontologist, you're in a certain layer of the rock, and certain layers of the rock represent certain time periods. And so once you're in that time period, you kind of narrow it down to what animals exist. And then from there, you go with shape based on certain things like how the animals move. Swimming animals have certain types of legs versus walking animals, and you go by shape. And this is called morphology. And that's a whole study field that you can get into.
So I'm going to actually highlight one of my very favorite stories in all of paleontology about this exact thing. When they went looking for like the things that came up onto land that led to all the land animals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, they knew 380 million years ago, nothing was walking around like that. They knew by 360 million years ago, things were walking around like that. So you're looking for rocks that are in the exact time range. And there's like 3 places in the world that they were like that. They went looking and they found Tiktaalik. They found these amazing species that are just so cool. These sort of bridge species that are fantastic. So I'm so glad we brought that up. Christy, I'm going to head to you next with our next question. Great questions, guys. Keep them coming in the chat. I love this. This is fantastic. Miss Georgia's class wants to know, what degree or degrees do you need to be a paleontologist?
I would say you don't necessarily need a very specific degree. So there are paleontologists that have degrees in all kinds of different fields. So some people might have a degree in zoology or in anatomy or in whatever specific type of animal that they're interested in. There are a lot of different paths to becoming a paleontologist. So you don't have to have a PhD. You could have a master's degree. You can have a bachelor's degree. There's a bunch of different routes to go that way. You can work in a museum. You could work at a university. So there's all kinds of options.
Fantastic. One of the things we brought up actually to broadcast a couple days ago that I'd like all our audience to learn about by the end of this broadcast, Mary Anning. So all February long, we spend celebrating amazing women in science and exploration around the world. Mary Anning's a name that's sort of becoming more popular. There's a Hollywood movie now, which is exciting, but people should learn about her. She, the person behind She Sells Seashells by the Seashore. And yes, I am proud of myself for nailing that on the first try. Everyone should check that out when you're done this broadcast. It's fantastic. Okay, let's keep diving in. YouTube audience, we've got groups in South Carolina, we've got groups in Pennsylvania, all over the US and Canada. Feel free to share those questions in the chat. Therapsids, Bryan, I think you were the one who answered this earlier. The students in Miss Fowler's class want to know, when did the therapsid live? What's going on with them?
Yeah, so they lived in a time known as the Permian, which was, let's see if I can remember my geologic time scale here, around like older than 252 million years ago. So like very long time. Trying to think of a million-year timescales can be rather challenging, but this was far before things like dinosaurs even evolved. And so these were very, very long time ago.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring back in Marc for this to talk about some of these ancient times for a second, because again, you're right. It's really hard to conceive of millions of years. We're not equipped for it as people. You know, we think back to like our great-great-grandfather and you're like, okay, how long ago was that? I have no idea, much less millions of years. Now, Marc, you deal in paleoanthropology. How long when did we split off from the lineage that led to chimpanzees? No pressure at all. I know that like people still fight about this regularly. And like, how far back does our fossil record go? If we were to do paleontology writ large, where are we taking ourselves?
Yeah, so I mean, for when we split off from the chimpanzees, or the last common ancestor we share with the chimpanzee lineage, nowadays, like looking at genetics and fossils, between 10 to 7 million years ago is probably a good guess. Though as soon as I say that, I'm sure tonight there's going to be a new paper out saying that that's wrong. But that's kind of what we date, and the fossil record kind of supports it, but it's really tricky. And yeah, I think one of the difficulties is, as Bryan alluded to, is even thinking back, right? So the oldest things I work with are like 6 million years old, right? Which for someone like Bryan is not that long ago. For most people, that's a long, long time ago. So I think one way to think about it for the folks listening is if you sort of extended your arms all the way from the tip of one hand to the tip of the other hand, and if you just sort of went with a nail file and just rubbed off like a little bit of your nail, that would fall down. That's when humans were on the Earth. The beginning of it is when Earth started. So like, we haven't been here for that long, right? We've had a remarkable impact on the Earth in that time we've been here. So it is really, I think, hard sometimes for even me to grasp, right, when these things happen. I mean, farming was only 12,000 years ago. That is remarkably quick. And so much has changed since then.
And you get to like animal domestication, you get to writing, which is even more recent. Like, it's mind-blowing. The cosmic calendar and the cosmic time scale, when you think about how long either the Earth's been here in comparison to the universe or man on the Earth, it's like honestly, that perspective that you get from science. And I think paleontology does that better than pretty much any other discipline. This fact that you can look back and go, wow, life's been around for about 4 billion years. And like 2 billion of that was like scum in the water. And then we had like a little bit of, the plants sort of came around like 450 million years ago, and like nothing comes on land. Like we get these worlds with like dragonflies the size of seagulls and millipedes the size of cars. And then we get dinosaurs, and you have mammals that like, we talked about Walter the Andricotherium earlier today in one of the past March Mammal Madnesses, which is the greatest name for an Andricotherium. People should look them up. Walter's the perfect name for them all. But I mean, this is so exciting. And anyway, the nail file thing is incredible. Welcome in Nebraska too. We've got people talking about their favorite extinctions now. So this is what you guys have done. The Permian's the best. So I'm curious, actually, amidst, troubling times in conservation now, can we talk about who would like to take a field, some of the past extinctions? Like, this is classically the 6th mass extinction on the Earth, which means there were 5 more before that. Yara, Kristi, did you want to come in and dive in on this a little bit? Other extinctions in history and what happened.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for example, I mean, that one classroom mentioned Permian extinction, huge. But before that, there was even the Ordovician extinction, and then of course the other one that's really quite famous is the one that ended all the dinosaurs, the KT extinction. But there are at least two others, and it's interesting because people study extinctions on the basis of animal turnover. So this group of animals was around before something happened, and then a whole new group of animals was around after. And so people study extinctions from so many different directions within paleontology. You can study it chemically, see what happened to the rocks, what happened to the animals, ecologically, how spaces shifted. Extinction is super interesting to study, even though it's scary in modern times.
I like that you mentioned these groups of animals, though. Like, we're in the age of mammals, and it's classically, almost certainly true that if we don't have the meteorite, we don't wipe out the dinosaurs, we're not here having this conversation. We might be a bunch of velociraptors having this conversation, which would be super cool, but that's a whole different kettle of fish and some science fiction stuff. Kristi, is there anything you'd like to add about some of those past major extinctions?
I think Yara covered it all.
Perfect. Hey, it's a good problem to have, everybody. Let's take a question from YouTube. Oh, you know what? We've got so many folks. You guys have inspired a lot of our audiences today. We've got groups that really want these extinction brackets. So like Katie, I know you're watching next year, maybe 16, maybe 30, maybe the whole thing, just all dead things. Like no living things anymore because the return of all those therapsids and strange things from the past. Very, very cool.
Most things that have lived on Earth are dead. So,
Beautiful, so poetic. Yeah, what is it? It's like 99.9%. And I love this too, thinking about this. I talked at the beginning about sort of the miracle of fossilization, like the fact that this can happen, the conditions that it takes to be able to create a dinosaur where you can find it and dig it up millions of years later is unbelievable. But we have like records of a few thousand dinosaur species. And on this planet right now, there's somewhere between 2 and 30 million species alive right now. So these worlds, we are only scratching the surface. That's why there's so much to discover, so many cool things with membranous and feathered wings. Like it's just a fantastic opportunity to learn so much more about ancient worlds. Katie's jumping in and talking about, in the past we did this. So I'm curious about past programs. In the history of March Mammal Madness, depending on how long you've been involved, is there something that you particularly loved? Like, was there an all-time favorite? Marc's Marc, what was your favorite? What do you think? All time.
Well, I'll go with the one that gave me maybe the most trouble, but also the most favorite one. And this was from last year, so we're at 2021, I guess. There was a fossil, Mars erector, Anubis, which is not a hyena, but a hyena-like thing, and it's in its teeth. And it was going up against something called the crypt keeper wasp. And I guess a lot of kids are listening, and if you're like my kids, you love creepy things. So this wasp does some really creepy things that parasites another wasp, and it kind of messed up. So I saw this on the bracket. I'm like, oh, that seems like a really fun battle to write, right? I like fossils. Mars erector is kind of a newish thing. I kind of knew a bit about it. I'm like, that'd be fun to write, and it'd be really easy to write because I can easily come up with a way that Mars erector would, beat the wasp. And what I hadn't checked, or I don't think I even looked carefully enough, is since this was from last year now, is it was an upset, and Mars erector was number 2, Crypt Keeper was number 15, but the wasp won. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And I reached out to Chris Anderson, who's one of the MMM people and an entomologist. And we were like, it took us a while. It took me a long time to find a way to do that, right? But I learned a lot because I was like, oh my God, I have to find a way to make this. And it was the best thing ever because there's a hardcore team of entomologists who follow MMM and give us, trash talk about not being enough, bugs. And then when it won, they got so excited. But I spent 3 days with a lot of hate on Twitter for the people who I left their bracket because, people thought that thing was going to go all the way, and it went out in round 1. That's hilarious. I love that so much. I like that his Latin name ended with Anubis too, which is truly amazing. I love scientific Latin names are the best. And again, if you want to learn about the research that goes into this, how you can see these battles in action, learn about why you'd pick what you pick, check out the Lib Guide. It's your one-stop shop to all that. I'll put that in the YouTube chat in a minute. So for you, Yara, is there a favorite battle you had or one that you'd really like to see in future brackets? I'm curious.
So I have a confession to make. This is actually my first time to be playing and first time to be participating. So I'll get back to you next year.
Okay. Now, what about like future? Is there like a favorite species of yours in the history of the paleontological record that like in 2023 you want to see there?
I feel like I should keep this a secret because I have so
Okay.
many recommendations for like entire brackets.
You know
So
what? We won't tell. You know what? No one's watching. We won't tell anybody if you tell us. No, fine. We'll keep it secret for now. Christy, do you have a all-time fave pick?
My all-time favorite was not a particular battle, but it was a particular species, and that was the Paraceratherium that you mentioned earlier, Team Walter. Indricotheres are amazing. This was this humongous, absolutely ginormous animal, I should say, that lived, let's say, 25 million years ago. It was between like 15 to 20 tons, one of the largest land animals of all time. Obviously should have won, but did not win. We won't talk about that, but seriously, the coolest. Paraceratherium, all the way.
So one of you might know this offhand. I've been to the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and the thing that really struck me the most about it compared to any other museum I've had the chance to visit in the world is that a lot of museums have dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are great. We all love dinosaurs. But the one in New York has all these giant mammals, and they have a whole gallery dedicated to them. In Glyptodon, you have these like armadillos that are bigger than cars. You have sloths that can like rip up a tree and rip it in half. And I mean, that's so neat. I hope everyone gets that chance to see that museum. It's just an amazing place in general. But the mammal gallery is particularly special, and they've got some giant things like Kristi was mentioning. So thank you very much for that. Bryan, last but not least, and then we have time for like one more question after this. This is very sad. Time flies and you're having fun, but Bryan, take us away.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember Walter. That whole it was a whole division of paleo stuff. That was really great. I really enjoyed, the short-faced cave bear in that who went on to win, which was pretty fantastic. Also talking about the entelodonts, which were large relatives of pigs, but that were fully carnivorous. Those were really fun, and we had a lot of fun talking about those and introducing those to a lot of people along the way.
So pigs are terrifying. Pigs get this like rap as being cute and cuddly and sweet and farm. No, like in the wild, even modern pigs are like, you don't want to ever run into a pig. I'd much rather run into a bear than a pig. In the wild, the bear's going to run away screaming. This is half the fun of things like March Mammal Madness is people get to learn about these animals. We do a lot of programs on aquatic creatures. People are always terrified of piranhas. Oh, if you jump in the water, piranhas will strip you of flesh. Piranhas, I've worked in an aquarium. They hide in the corner and they shiver with fear when people come into their tank. And so when we get the chance to dive in on these creatures, some of their stats, some of the information we learned about them, it's such a special opportunity.
Well, that actually brings us back to the therapsid that we have this year, which is Lystrasaurus, which is about the size of a pig. So maybe not the most sort of dynamic or large animal you might think of when you think of a therapsid. It was basically a pig, herbivorous, chomping on plants.
We talked about like ancient elephanty things. We've talked about dire wolves. We talked about like, I'm curious because this year I've said this in every broadcast. I am team sentient pinecone, pangolins all the way. It's like the obvious pick. Nothing can beat them. Orcas hold nothing. You can't do anything against them. None of your picks even come close to pangolins. Was there like any giant ancient pangolin? Do you guys know offhand? Like, or is there only the pangolin now? They just spring into existence fully formed and awesome and perfect.
That is a very good question. I think that there were, but I don't actually know.
I'm so excited if you don't know offhand. That's so great.
Yeah, I don't know one offhand either. I think the closest thing, I mean, just shape and like armor wise would be Glyptodon, but that's again more like a beetle.
Armadillo.
Yeah, more armadillo-y than pinecone.
Yeah, it's a different order.
Well,
right?
there is also that. Yeah.
You say more armadillo-y than pinecone? This is great. So we've been trying to come up with slogans for every broadcast today. You said earlier, mud slurping bottom dwelling early vertebrates, which is a great slogan for the whole episode. So we're gonna figure it out. But that's a nice, Yara, you're giving us all our beautiful content, which means you need to be in March Mammal Madness for years to come. You four, this has been so much fun. I know we could talk about ancient life all day long. I do want to make sure that people have the chance to check out and learn more about the whole program. So again, head to that lib guide, check it out. So much great information there. You can root for your favorite ancient animal in that one tiny little bit of bracket. Team Therapsid today, all our friends, which is great. Head to Twitter, 2022 MMM Let's Go. Gives the whole sense of the fun that you guys can have. And of course, our slogan for the whole thing, if you're learning, you're winning. You don't need to win the bracket. You don't need to know everything by the end. Just have a great time. What an amazing opportunity to learn so many things about all the magical life alive and dead on this planet. Kristi, Bryan, Marc, Yara, thank you so much for joining us today. And keep up the amazing work. We look very forward to having you tune in for other broadcasts in the hours to come. And bye for now, everybody. See you.